November 11th, 1918, Compiègne Forest. The guns fall silent across Europe as Germany signs the armistice that ends 4 years of slaughter. But in the remote corners of German East Africa, thousands of native soldiers who fought for the Kaiser face a question no treaty addresses. What happens to colonial troops when their empire vanishes overnight? How do you return home when home no longer wants you? What price do you pay for serving the losing side? Germany's colonial empire stretched across 4 continents before the war. 2.5 million Africans lived under German rule in Tanganyika, Southwest Africa, Cameroon, and Togo. When war erupted in August 1914, colonial governors pressed over 100,000 native soldiers and carriers into service. They fought British, French, Belgian, and South African forces from the Kalahari Desert to the shores of Lake Victoria. Now the armistice strips Germany of every overseas territory. The men who served are scattered, abandoned, and marked as traitors by their own people. Lieutenant Colonel Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck commands the last German force in East Africa when the armistice reaches him on November 23, 1918. His column includes 14,000 Askari soldiers and 3,000 German officers and NCOs. They have fought undefeated for 4 years across 2,000 miles of bush and mountain. Von Lettow-Vorbeck orders his men to lay down their weapons at Abercorn in northern Rhodesia on November 25th. The British count exactly 11,746 rifles surrendered. The German officers board ships for Hamburg within weeks. The Askari face a different fate. British authorities refuse to repatriate them to territories now under Allied control. South African General John Smuts declares the Askari potential sources of unrest and orders them held in camps along the Uganda Railway. By January 1919, over 8,000 former German colonial soldiers sit behind barbed wire at Mombasa, Kisumu, and Nakuru. Camp conditions deteriorate rapidly through the dry season. British medical officer Captain James Morrison reports on February 14th that dysentery cases exceed 200 daily at Nakuru alone. Food rations drop to 800 calories per day. Water comes from contaminated wells. Deaths climb past 50 per week by March. The men who fought 4 years without surrender die of neglect in peacetime camps. Kaiser Wilhelm's government collapses in Berlin, while his colonial soldiers rot in East Africa. The new Republican authorities disavow all colonial commitments on January 15th, 1919. Foreign Minister Count Ulrich von Brockdorff-Rantzau cables British authorities. Germany accepts no responsibility for native troops serving former colonial administrations. The Askari become men without a country. If you value documented Webu-Wagner in post-war history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Now, back to the story. British authorities begin forced repatriation in April 1919. Transport ships carry Askari back to territories they fought to defend, now under new flags. The SS Kinfon's Castle docks at Dar es Salaam on April 28th, with 1,200 former German soldiers aboard. British Administrator Sir Horace Byatt warns London these men pose significant security risks to the new Tanganyika Mandate. Local populations view returning Askari as collaborators and enemies. In the Rufiji Delta, Sergeant Major Omari Ibn Hassan leads 43 veterans who served von Lettow-Vorbeck through the entire campaign. They arrive at Kilifi village on May 6th to find their families moved away and their land redistributed. Village headman Juma al-Mazrui refuses them shelter. "You fought for the Germans," he tells Hassan. "Find German beds." The rejection spreads across former German territories. In Southwest Africa, British authorities dump 700 Herero and Nama veterans at Windhoek Station on June 3rd. These men fought German colonial forces in the uprising of 1904 to 1907 Dux, then served Germany against South African forces after 1914. Neither side claims them now. South African Administrator Sir Edward Gorges orders them moved to a former concentration camp at Shark Island. Corporal Samuel Carrico reaches his village in the Keprivy Strip after 18 months in British camps. He carries discharge papers signed by von Lettow-Vorbeck and a service medal struck in Berlin. His wife Nangula has remarried, believing him dead. His cattle belong to other families. The new headman, installed by South African authorities, declares Carrico's land forfeit for collaboration with enemy forces. Carrico sleeps in abandoned huts and begs for work. Economic collapse follows political rejection. Colonial authorities implemented new currencies after the war, making German and East African rupees worthless. Askari who received pay in German currency find their savings wiped out. Private Wilhelm Mataka hoarded 460 rupees during 4 years of fighting. The notes become scrap paper when British authorities introduce the East African shilling in September 1919. Some veterans attempt to organize resistance. In Dodoma, former Sergeant Ramadani Juma gathers 230 Askari in July 1919. They demand recognition of their service and compensation for lost property. British District Commissioner Herbert Thompson arrests Juma on July 24th for seditious assembly. Military tribunal sentences him to 5 years hard labor. The movement dissolves within days. Others seek refuge in religion. Mission stations become gathering points for displaced veterans throughout 1919 and 1920. Catholic Father Heinrich Johansson at Bagamoyo reports over 400 former Askari seeking sanctuary by October 1919. They work for food and shelter while hiding their military past. Protestant missions turn them away, fearing government retaliation. The German government ignores veterans, appeals for assistance. Chancellor Gustav Bauer faces revolution at home and reparation demands from the Allies. Colonial Minister Adolf Köster writes privately in November 1919, "We have no resources for distant obligations to native soldiers. Their service ended with the armistice. No pensions reach Africa, no medals arrive from Berlin. Death rates among veterans remain high through 1920. Malnutrition, disease, and despair claim lives across former German territories. Dr. Albert Schweitzer encounters 47 former Askari at his hospital in Lambaréné in February 1920. 21 die of tuberculosis and infected wounds within 3 months. They fought bravely for Germany," Schweitzer writes. "Germany forgets them completely. Some veterans flee to French territories seeking better treatment. Captain Brahim Saul leads 86 former German soldiers across the border from Cameroon into Chad in March 1920. French authorities intern them at Fort Lamy, but provide better rations and medical care than British camps." Saul writes to his family, "The French treat us as prisoners, but feed us as humans." Others attempt to reach Germany itself. Former Lieutenant Omar Ben Saleh pools resources with 12 veterans in Tanganyika to buy passage to Hamburg. They arrive in November 1920 with discharge papers and campaign medals. German port authorities deny them entry as undesirable aliens. They sail back to Dar es Salaam on the same ship, poorer and more desperate. The few who adapt find new roles far from their home territories. Sergeant Major Hassan bin Ahmed reaches British Somaliland in early 1921. His German military training impresses British officers facing rebellion in the interior. They recruit him as a scout and interpreter. Ahmed serves British forces against the Dervish resistance led by Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, fighting his former German comrades, enemies under a new flag. Violence erupts when peaceful appeals fail. In Southwest Africa, Captain David Witbooi gathers 140 Nama veterans at Gibeon in August 1921. They demand land rights and recognition of military service. South African police surround the camp on August 19th. Shooting begins when Witbooi refuses to surrender German weapons hidden since 1918. 23 veterans die in the firefight. Witbooi bleeds out in the Kalahari dust, clutching von Lettow-Vorbeck's signed commendation. British authorities launch investigations into veterans' networks after the Gibeon incident. Intelligence officer Major Charles Dundas identifies 412 former German colonial soldiers across East Africa by October 1921. He recommends permanent surveillance of all veterans as potential security threats. Secret police begin monitoring mission stations, trading posts, and rural villages where Askari gather. Family connections provide the only reliable support network. In Tanganyika, women's groups organized by former soldiers, wives create informal welfare systems. They share food, shelter sick veterans, and hide men wanted by authorities. Maria Kamambo loses her husband in a British camp, but continues helping his former comrades. She operates a safe house in Moshi, where veterans rest during long journeys seeking work or family. The passage of time brings gradual acceptance in some communities. Villages that initially rejected veterans slowly readmit individuals who prove their loyalty to new authorities. Former Private Jonas Shangali returns to his village in the Usambra Mountains in 1923. He publicly burns his German uniform and renounces his military service. The ceremony satisfies local headmen and British administrators. Shangali receives permission to farm 2 acres of marginal land. Others refuse to abandon their German identity. Sergeant Major Friedrich Rukwangya keeps his German name and speaks German at home until his death in 1954. His children learn Prussian drill commands before local languages. He wears his Iron Cross second class to church every Sunday in defiance of British and later independent authorities. Neighbors call him the German, with mixtures of respect and suspicion. Death claims the majority of veterans within a decade of the armistice. Malnutrition, untreated wounds, and tropical diseases kill men who survived 4 years of combat. Cemetery records in Dar es Salaam show 642 burials of former German colonial soldiers between 1919 and 1929. Most graves lack headstones. Colonial authorities forbid German military honors at funerals. The German government begins limited recognition efforts only after Hitler rises to power. Nazi colonial propaganda discovers the abandoned Askari in 1936. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels orders documentary films celebrating Germany's loyal African soldiers. The films never mention their post-war abandonment. Veterans receive small pensions starting in 1938, 20 years after the armistice. Most original soldiers are already dead. World War II brings final displacement for surviving veterans. Allied forces occupy remaining German territories and eliminate Nazi pension programs. The handful of living Askari lose their benefits again in 1943. British authorities view any German connection as suspicious during the new war. Former Sergeant Ali bin Rashid, age 71, faces internment in Kenya simply for receiving German mail before 1939. Independence movements in the 1950s and 1960s ignore colonial veterans entirely. New African governments focus on anti-colonial heroes, not men who served European powers. Tanzania's Julius Nyerere mentions German colonial soldiers once in his speeches, calling them misguided brothers who serve the wrong cause. No monuments commemorate their service. No streets bear their names. Portuguese authorities in Mozambique discover the last confirmed German East Africa veteran in 1968. Former Corporal Antonio Mahamba lives alone in a hut near Lourenço Marques. He speaks fluent German and keeps a signed photograph of von Lettow Vorbeck. Mahamba dies in 1971 at age 86. His nephew burns the photograph in military papers, fearing political complications. Research in the 1990s reveals the full scope of abandonment. German federal archives contain over 2,000 files on colonial military service, but no records of post-war assistance programs. British Colonial Office papers document camp deaths and repatriation problems, but offer no apologies or compensation. The men who fought loyally for 4 years simply vanished from official memory on both sides. Dr. Robert Moffat examines Nakuru camp in April 1919. His classified report documents deliberate starvation and medical neglect. These men are dying at rates that exceed wartime casualties, Moffat writes. This appears intentional. Major William Fletcher cuts rations to 600 calories daily at Mombasa. His diary reveals orders from Nairobi. Reduce expenditure on German natives by any means necessary. Former Captain Bakari Mwinyi organizes a breakout from Kisumu camp on June 7, 1919. 43 Askari scatter into the Kavirondo Hills. British forces recapture 31 within a week. The 12 escapees become legends among survivors, though none reach home. Colonel James Hartwell burns all camp records at Nakuru on September 15th. 3 truckloads of documents turn to ash, erasing evidence of systematic murder. French territories impose strict surveillance on fleeing veterans. Colonel Henri Marchand tracks 347 former German soldiers by December 1920. Portuguese Mozambique offers refuge near Beira and Lourenço Marques. Veterans work as dock laborers while secretly teaching children German military songs. Former Corporal Abdul Aziz creates coded messages using Arab traders between coastal cities. British intelligence intercepts 17 messages in 1922 but cannot break the cipher. Religious conversion becomes survival strategy. Father Joseph Rigaud baptizes 87 former Askari at Bagamoyo Mission between March 1921 and November 1922. Most still speak German prayers despite conversion. Indian traders exploit desperate veterans through debt slavery contracts on sisal plantations. Veterans sign for food and housing, but discover wages never cover accumulating charges for basic supplies. Over 2,000 women serve German colonial forces as medics and communications operators. Authorities refuse recognition or assistance. Nurse Fatima Bint Said dies of syphilis in Dar es Salaam in 1923. Her military service unknown to charity workers who bury her. 800 child soldiers grow up stateless after the armistice. Police arrest dozens in Mombasa for theft, many carrying unreadable German identification papers. Captain David Thompson documents German soldier madness in his 1924 medical report. Veterans march in formation through villages, salute invisible officers, and shout German commands at night. Communities view them as possessed and drive them away. German Colonial Society agent Klaus Weber contacts only 37 confirmed veterans during 6 months undercover as a botanist. Most refuse to speak, fearing renewed persecution. British authorities prohibit former German soldiers from marrying without special permits, requiring background investigations. Census records list hundreds of children as father unknown to protect families. Colonial policies ban German language instruction and religious services. Former Lieutenant Klaus Mbwana receives 30 days hard labor in 1926 for conducting a funeral in German. Hospital records show systematic denial of medical care except for infectious diseases threatening public health. Underground networks preserve German military traditions in remote locations. British intelligence discovers 23 veterans conducting night exercises with wooden rifles in the Perry Mountains in 1928. Authorities arrest all participants for illegal assembly. The 1919 influenza pandemic kills 40% of malnourished veterans, compared to 15% general population mortality. The 1922 drought forces survivors to abandon farming and return to begging. The Treaty of Versailles ignores African soldiers who served Germany. League of Nations officials reject veteran petitions. Ruling colonial soldiers were not covered under international military conventions. Former Captain Omar Ben Hassan spends his savings on Geneva lawyers who confirm Germany and Britain bear no legal responsibility. Professor Hans Meyer interviews 41 survivors between 1927 and 1929, recording experiences on wax cylinders. He smuggles the recordings to Germany, where they remain classified until 1987. Economic recovery in the late 1920s creates limited opportunities for skilled veterans. Former Sergeant Major Franz Kilimanjaro supervises road construction in Tanga, hiding his military background. The Global Depression eliminates progress by 1930. Veterans lose jobs first as employers eliminate workers with questionable backgrounds. Former Major David Makalama organizes 112 survivors in Dodoma in January 1932. Their petition to Berlin receives no response. British authorities arrest Makalama and 17 organizers. Nazi propaganda crews arrive in 1938 to film aging Askari for newsreels. Veterans receive small pensions and worthless German citizenship certificates in exchange for praising Hitler. The films disappear from German archives after 1945. World War II brings final persecution. 80-year-old veterans face internment alongside Nazi agents. Corporal Ahmed bin Sultan dies of a heart attack during a 1943 police raid in Zanzibar. Post-independence Tanzania views German colonial soldiers as imperial collaborators. No monuments acknowledge their service. St. Joseph's Mission in Bagamoyo records 347 veteran burials between 1945 and 1970. German Federal Archives discover massive gaps where documentation was deliberately destroyed. Forensic investigations in the 1990s uncover burial grounds with hundreds of unmarked graves, showing signs of malnutrition and violence. In 1998, construction workers in Dar es Salaam uncover a mass grave containing the remains of 68 individuals. Forensic examination reveals German military buttons, Iron Cross medals, and Askari insignia buried with the bones. The grave holds former German colonial soldiers who died in British camps after the armistice, buried without records under false names to hide the extent of neglect. DNA analysis confirms these men died between 1919 and 1921 during the systematic elimination of Germany's abandoned colonial army.